I want to go more in depth on the COVID test side of this. Because remember, they're talking about right now, it's hitting the news right now, reports are all over the place, that basically these ancestral type programs can be used to create bioweapons. But what's not being mentioned in the current news reports is that the Chinese Communist Party was already collecting DNA data through the COVID test kits, and that the Biden administration actually was purchasing these test kits from China. They're giving money to these Chinese companies to make these test kits. Data is being processed in the Chinese labs, and they're getting your biometric data, your DNA data. The same data that they're saying right now, and they're blaming it on these, again, ancestral things, the same data that can be used for what they call targeted assassination or civilization killers. So let's go back to 2021 again. This is Reuters reporting this, and it said Chinese state fund invests in gene firm BGI. Now, BGI was this Chinese company that is one of the largest companies in the world doing these COVID-19 test kits, and this was the one that was exposed in that 60 Minutes piece as well. Interestingly, so I want to show you the two sides of this, that it was tied both to the Chinese government and to the Chinese military. And so first off here, Reuters was reporting that the Chinese government has made an investment in BGI Genomics Co., a listed Chinese company that has supplied millions of COVID-19 tests globally as the gene firm seeks to fund exponential growth driven by the pandemic. BGI Genomics, the company's subsidiary listed on the Shenzhen Stock Exchange, raised the equivalent of just over $300 million in a private placement to investors, including China's biggest state investment vehicle, the State Development and Investment Corp. Filings to the exchange on February 1st, 2021, of course, show this. And SDIC is wholly owned by the Chinese central government, which appoints its board, and has focused on strategic emerging industries, including biotechnology and artificial intelligence, and infrastructure that serve China's national interests, according to public statements. The Central State-Owned Enterprise, that's SOE Poverty Area Industrial Investment Fund, which is managed by SDIC Chuangyi, is a wholly owned venture capital subsidiary of SDIC. Now, of course, if you say SOE, that's state-owned enterprise, people argue, of course, that the Chinese Communist Party is not communist. These are state-owned enterprises. Communism does not get rid of the big corporations. It does not get rid of the factories. It makes them state-owned. And that's what these are. These are state-owned enterprises. As it states as well, the boards are appointed by the Chinese Communist Party leadership. These are just extensions of the Chinese Communist Party into the business sphere. That's all they are. And it says as well they paid 200 million renminbi, about $30.8 million for 1.4 million shares in BGI Genomics, a spokesperson told Reuters. Now, the investment gave SDIC Chuangyi a shareholding of about 1/3% in BGI Genomics, according to them. And U.S. security officials have warned American labs against using Chinese tests for COVID-19 because of concern that China was seeking to gather foreign genetic data for its own research. BGI denied that. Now, briefly as well, if you're a company in China, there is no such thing as a company independent of the Chinese Communist Party, and there's no such thing as any kind of Communist Party system being not tied to the Chinese military. The Chinese military is not like the American military, which is sworn to uphold and protect the Constitution. In China, the PLA, the People's Liberation Army, is the armed wing of the Chinese Communist Party. Their sole role, sole purpose, is to protect the Chinese Communist Party. It'd be more equivalent if the Republicans had their own military or the Democrats had their own military. So that there's no differentiation between them. Even then, though, these companies have actually direct ties to the Chinese military, like not even just behind the scenes, but on the surface. Reuters also had this in 2021. It said, exclusive Chinese gene firm providing worldwide COVID tests worked with Chinese military. And further in, it states the review of more than 40 publicly available documents and research papers in Chinese and English show BGI's links to the People's Liberation Army, including research with China's top military supercomputing experts. The extent of those links has not previously been reported. BGI has sold millions of COVID-19 test kits outside China since the outbreak of the new coronavirus pandemic, including to Europe, Australia, and the United States. And it continues stating, documents reviewed by Reuters neither contradict nor support the U.S. suspension. Still, materials show that the link between the Chinese military and BGI run deeper than previously understood, illustrating how China has moved to integrate private technology companies into military-related research. Now, I'm going to dig into this piece by piece. I want to kind of unfold this gradually and show you what's really happening with this. But one of the big questions we should answer or ask is whether this company, BGI, has any ties to the United States. We know BGI now is supplying global test kits for COVID. We know that it has ties to both the Chinese Communist Party and directly to the Chinese military. We know the Chinese military is developing biological weapons using this type of data to target specific ethnic groups and for targeted assassinations, as has been warned, and also for different types of biometric tracking. Are they involved with anybody in the United States? Do they have any key ties here in the United States? And well, yes, they do. Let me show you this. National Pulse 2021, Bill Gates Foundation funded genomics firm mining DNA data through COVID-19 tests. And that specific company is BGI Genomics, that exact one we just discussed. It says BGI Genomics, the Chinese Communist Party linked genomics firm flagged by U.S. officials as mining the DNA of Americans, has collaborated extensively with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the National Pulse can reveal. The company has recently come under fire following a 60 minutes expose on the company's use of COVID-19 tests to, quote, collect, store, and exploit biometric information on American citizens, according to former U.S. intelligence officials. What's more, a recent Reuters article linked the firm to the Chinese Communist Party's military, in addition to the Obama administration allowing the firm to gain a foothold in the U.S. So the Obama administration let them come in. Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation played a critical role in BGI's American expansion. Obama lets them in, lets them gain a foothold here. Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation helped them spread throughout the country, helped them grow. Now, I won't go over the whole article, but it goes pretty in depth. It notes that Gates has ties to BGI going all the way back to 2010 at least. And of course, it wasn't just limited to just 2010. Going forward, there were several key iterations where he helped them quite a bit. BGI, meanwhile, was collecting Americans' DNA data for, again, pretty nefarious purposes and with ties as well to the Chinese military, which was, of course, weaponizing this data, as has been exposed since then. Now, on a related note, something else important on this. Now, let's keep in mind a few key points. If the Chinese Communist Party is trying to collect American biometric data using COVID-19 tests, right? We can establish this is that is true. They're trying to collect American DNA using COVID-19 tests. That was one of the main controversies with BGI. They want to weaponize these things. That was discussed back in 2019. It's being discussed again right now. The Pentagon is aware of this. The Pentagon knew this. The Pentagon actually warned American troops not to use DNA test kits because of this. And of course, they were talking about these Ancestral type programs, but they weren't talking about the COVID-19 tests, right? But the Pentagon was aware. So that raises a key question. If the Pentagon knew all of this, which they did, because again, they warned troops about it, why are they buying COVID-19 test kits from China? The Pentagon. Let me show you. Department of Defense, 2019. Funny enough, the exact same year that the Pentagon was warning troops not to be sending their DNA tests to other countries. The Department of Defense awards. This is the actual DoD website. This is the Pentagon website. This is their actual report. DoD awards contracts to purchase COVID-19 antigen over-the-counter test kits in support of POTUS's, Biden's, $500 million free at-home COVID-19 tests. Now, I'm going to explain what these companies are. So it says here, today, the Department of Defense, in coordination with the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, awarded contracts to Abbott Rapid DX North America, iHealth Labs. iHealth Labs is the Chinese connected one, quickly. And Roche Diagnostic, which they say, on here they say iHealth Lab Inc. from Mountain View, California. Yeah, they have a base there, but they're a Chinese company, right? Hear me out. Roche Diagnostic Corporation purchasing a combined total of 380 million over-the-counter COVID-19 test kits. The effort supports the president's plan, Biden's, to deliver 500 million free at-home COVID-19 tests to the nation in response to the Omicron variant. The DoD's Joint Program Executive Office for Chemical, Biological, Radiological, and Nuclear Defense led this effort in partnership with DoD's Defense Assistant Acquisition Cell, Army Contracting Command, and the HHS Health and Human Services Office of the Assistant Secretary for Preparedness and Response. The procurement was funded through the American Rescue Plan Act to supply critical medical resources to the nation. Interestingly as well, again, the Department of Defense Joint Program Executive Office for Chemical, Biological, Radiological, and Nuclear Defense was involved with this. Remember that they're actually having military operations right now, trainings in Canada. Not saying that's connected, but it is interesting. Now, the important part with this, though, is that while the Pentagon was warning troops not to use ancestral type programs, they weren't telling them they couldn't, but they were warning them not to do it, again, because it could be used to target them, that foreign adversaries like China and Russia could use them. Meanwhile, we're aware that these COVID-19 test kits can be used for the exact same purposes, and while the Pentagon was making a warning on one side, it was purchasing these Chinese test kits that can be used for the exact same purposes on the other side. Let me show you this. iHealth Lab is a Chinese company. And in that deal through the Pentagon, they actually were the they were the biggest one to get this money from the government. And there's interesting things with this as well, because the Biden administration made this excuse that they'd had to do it, but evidence actually showed they did not have to do it, raising questions of why were they buying these Chinese kits.